The ballroom lights were so bright I could barely see the faces at the front tables, but I saw them. My mom's hand clamped around my dad's arm, my older brother Tyler sitting beside his pregnant wife, all four of them frozen as my name flashed across the giant screen behind me. Jenna Mitchell, CinderTrack Analytics. In my hand was a white envelope that felt heavier than paper should. The host had just announced an anonymous donation of $80,000, and in about 10 seconds, everyone in that Phoenix hotel was going to find out the donor was me. My name is Jenna Mitchell. I was 31 years old when a different check for $80,000 had first told me exactly where I stood in this family. If your parents ever picked one child and called it an investment, then turned to you years later for a bailout, what would you do? Would you write the check to save them or write them out of your life? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you think you'd have done in my place, because for a long time I believed there wasn't really a choice. Standing on that stage, fingers tight around the microphone, my mind didn't go to the champagne or the applause. It went somewhere else entirely, to a teenager on a city bus, and to a night in my parents' house, when $80,000 landed on the table like a crown for my brother and a slap for me. When I was 10, birthdays at our house in Phoenix looked like movie scenes, but only when they were for my brother. Tyler's parties came with themed decorations, rented speakers, cousins running through the yard, and relatives filming on their phones, while my mom gave speeches about his potential. On my birthdays, I got a store-bought cupcake and a city bus pass handed over with a stiff little smile about learning independence. The only adult who ever seemed genuinely glad to see me was Marvin, the bus driver on the route to school. Every morning he'd nod as I climbed on quietly, rest a hand on the seat behind him so no one else stole it, and let me sit where the hum of the engine felt like a small, safe island. In our house, everything revolved around performance, but only in languages my parents understood. When Tyler joined drama club and started talking about cinematography, my mom called it vision and charisma. She hung his headshots on the wall like they were already famous. When I joined the robotics team and spread wires and circuit boards over the kitchen table, she sighed about that mess and pushed my parts toward the edge so she could set out placemats. My dad liked numbers, but only when they were printed on tuition bills, donor plaques, or bonus checks. The year I won a local coding competition and the Phoenix paper printed a tiny blurb with my name, I taped it to the fridge. My mom peeled it off, smoothed the page, and said she'd file it, only she added because Mitchell looked respectable in print. Graduation did not change any of that. It just gave them a bigger stage. At my high school ceremony, my parents sat in the front row in coordinated outfits, already whispering about Tyler's next steps. He had been shortlisted for a nonprofit film fellowship, and every conversation looped back to who he might meet and what doors it might open. When my name was called, Tyler was busy cheering for a friend across the aisle. My parents clapped without standing, then hurried off afterward to get pictures of him in his honor cords and cinematic smile. That night, the family group chat exploded with messages about Tyler's interviews and his natural presence. My little coding trophy sat crooked on my dresser, catching dust while I quietly calculated what that celebration said about my value. The night everything cracked, the house smelled like roast beef and expensive candles, the ones my mom saved for what she called real occasions. I remember the shine of the table more than the food. Tyler sat across from me rehearsing talking points about film school in Los Angeles, while Mom gently corrected his phrasing like she was directing a scene. My dad cleared his throat and lifted his glass the way he did before big announcements. "Your mother and I have decided to cover everything for Tyler's first year out there," he said. "Tuition, housing, travel, $80,000 so he can focus on his art, not worry about money." Everyone smiled at him like he'd proclaimed a royal coronation. My fork hovered over my plate. I waited for one sentence about me, my cramped apartment, my overdue coding bootcamp balance. None came. When the silence stretched too long, I forced myself to speak. "I'm short on my tuition for the boot camp. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. $2,000 would get me current. I'll pay it back as soon as I'm working. The room didn't go quiet, it tilted. My mom didn't even glance my way. You don't deserve any more help, Jenna, she said, not loud but clear enough to slice straight through the small talk. Tyler's jaw clenched like I'd embarrassed him. I looked to my dad, expecting at least a softer version. Instead, he topped off his wine and shrugged. We have to put money where it brings returns, he said. You made your choices. In that second, something in me stopped trying. I smiled, nodded, and knew with absolute clarity that this was the last time I would ever sit there as if I had a place. After dessert, I stood up the chair, scraping louder than anything I could have said. My mom muttered about me being dramatic. Tyler rolled his eyes like I'd ruined a scene. I walked outside into the dry Phoenix night, the sky dim and warm. In the car, my phone lit up with message previews before I even turned the engine. Don't ruin this for your brother. You'll regret this. Be grateful we paid for anything at all. Ariana chimed in with a passive-aggressive, I know you're happy for Tyler deep down. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove back to my tiny place near downtown, listening only to the air conditioner rattle when I parked. The next morning, I made coffee, opened my old laptop, and created a new folder on the desktop called Life Plan. Inside that folder, I saved 3 blank documents and named them Savings Projects and Boundaries. Before I wrote a single line in any of them, I opened my Contacts app and scrolled all the way down. Mom, Dad, Tyler, Grandma, aunts and uncles who had spent years asking about him and not me. One by one, I hit delete. No announcement, no angry goodbye texts, just names turning into empty spaces. The silence afterward felt unnerving but also clean, like someone had finally turned off a loud TV that had been blaring in the background my whole life. By day, I poured espresso at a crowded cafe off Roosevelt Row, fixed the router every time the Wi-Fi dropped, and counted tips in crumpled bills. At night, I coded under a yellow thrift store lamp, teaching myself back-end frameworks from free videos and tracking every hour and dollar in a spreadsheet. A couple of months into that grind, one of the regulars at the cafe, Matt, who always ordered a triple shot and wore a badge from a logistics company, mentioned they needed someone who could handle both cables and code. Our system is older than my grandparents, he joked. We need someone who isn't afraid of dust or documentation. That's how I ended up contracting at Desert Link Logistics, an office park on the edge of downtown, with flickering lights and an aging server room. My badge just said tech support, but no one cared if I stayed after hours. Once everyone left, the open plan space became my lab. I stayed late running tests, tinkering with a script that would route deliveries around heat traffic and construction for the small companies we served. One night, Omar Khan, one of the senior engineers, stopped by my desk and watched my screen over the edge of a takeout container. That's not our dispatch system, he said, squinting. I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. It's just a thing I'm playing with, I answered. A way to cut fuel usage if drivers don't have to zigzag across town. Omar leaned on the cubicle wall, more interested than annoyed. Then stop playing with it, he said. Let's pitch it. A week later, we sat in a cramped conference room across from our boss, presenting what I had named Route Flow, a routing engine that nudged deliveries into smoother patterns. We tested it with food trucks, pharmacies, and a chain of desert plant nurseries whose drivers hated wasting gas. Every email document and dataset lived in neatly labeled folders. It wasn't paranoia, it was architecture. The pilot program worked better than any of us expected. Fuel costs went down, delivery windows tightened, customers started writing nice things in their own reports. One of those reports landed on the desk of a regional investor who had been quietly watching logistics tech. A month later, we had a meeting with him in a conference room that did not smell like old coffee. He wanted to spin this into its own company with us as founders. That's how CinderTrack Analytics was born. Omar and I signed the papers as co-founders, and I became CTO. Our first office was basically a cleaned-out storage room near the warehouse district with mismatched chairs and a secondhand whiteboard, but it was ours. We hired 2 more engineers, then 5, then a small sales team. Our emissions reports got picked up by a local paper, then a regional business blog. I still wore faded jeans and hoodies, and sometimes took the bus out of habit, but my ancient laptop finally got replaced. As the company grew, I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Carla Nguyen, after one of our investors casually asked if I had any support outside of work. Carla's office smelled like citrus tea and printer paper, and she had this way of asking questions that made me hear my own words differently. She didn't flinch when I told her about the $80,000 or the $2,000 I had begged for and been denied. "You learn to measure your worth by return on investment?" she said once, scribbling gently. "CinderTrack is you rewriting that equation." I stuck that line on a sticky note above my desk next to a picture of the bus pass I'd used for years. On days when the imposter syndrome got loud, I stared at that note and remembered how far I'd carried myself. A couple of years later, on a night when the monsoon clouds hadn't quite broken yet, I was scrolling through real estate listings more for fun than anything else when a photo stopped me cold. A top-floor unit downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows, raw concrete walls, and a balcony that looked out over the entire city. The price tag $3.8 million looked like a typo to the girl who once hoarded bus change. But CinderTrack was profitable, my shares were real, and the numbers on my screen didn't lie. I opened my banking app, ran the math twice, then forwarded the listing to our lawyer. We structured the purchase cleanly in my name. No co-signers, no other Mitchells on the paperwork. When I moved in on a hot, clear Saturday, the first thing I hung on the wall wasn't art. It was my old bus pass framed under glass with 4 words printed beneath it: "Wrong stops, right direction." Life in that penthouse wasn't glamorous in the way movies make it look. It was late-night debugging on the couch, early morning calls with clients in other time zones, laundry left in the dryer too long, and quiet dinners with Julian, the lanky, kind-eyed developer I'd met at a tech meetup who actually listened when I talked. He teased me about the way I still took the stairs sometimes instead of the elevator, like I didn't quite trust everything wouldn't disappear overnight. From my windows, I could see the freeway, the same roads we used to drive past in silence on family trips. Sometimes I'd stand on the balcony and imagine my parents in their stucco house across town, wondering if they had noticed how far I'd gone without them. For the first time, their absence didn't ache. It just felt accurate. The first crack in that silence came on a bright Saturday morning. Sun poured across the concrete floor. Julian and I were arguing lightly about which brunch spot had the best pancakes, and my phone buzzed with an unknown local number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me clicked and I swiped. "Jenna," a voice said. It sounded older, thinner, but unmistakable. "It's Tyler." There was freeway noise behind him like he was driving. "I just passed downtown," he said, breathless. "Your name is on the side of that glass building, CinderTrack." "That's you, isn't it, Jenna? What is that?" I looked out at the skyline at our logo on the building we'd just moved into. "What are you really asking, Tyler?" I said. On the other end there was a crackle, a sharp inhale, and then nothing. The call dropped. He didn't call back. Within an hour, my phone turned into a machine, firing out names I hadn't seen on screen in almost 4 years. Mom, Dad, Aunt Diane, Grandma, Tyler again. Voicemails stacked up, everyone carrying the same shape wrapped in different tones. My mom's voice was first syrupy and careful. "Tyler says some things that can't be true, honey," she said. "We're so proud if you've done well. Call us. Your brother's under a lot of stress with the baby coming. He needs his sister right now." My dad's message was rougher, pride and irritation mixed. "We should talk like adults," he said. "We're still family at the end of the day. There's no point in holding grudges when there's so much you could do." That afternoon, a courier knocked on the penthouse door with a cream envelope addressed in my mom's looping handwriting. It felt heavier than it should, like she'd stuffed it with years. The letter started with a tone she probably thought was warm. Tyler and Olivia are expecting, you'll be an aunt, isn't that wonderful? Then the numbers rolled out one after another. My father's repair shop had been slow for years. The bank was pressuring them about the line of credit they'd taken out to cover the rest of Tyler's tuition and living expenses in Los Angeles. Credit cards had been used as bridges more times than they meant to admit. The house needed a new roof. With a baby on the way, we all have to pull together, she wrote in neat cursive. Family supports each other. I know you're not a cold person. That last sentence landed harder than any of the financial details. I read the letter twice, folded it into a neat square, and dropped it in the trash. That night, I opened the boundaries document I'd made years ago and typed a single line. They missed the role, not the person. 3 days later, I mailed 2 envelopes of my own. The first to my mom was brief and almost formal. If contact is going to continue, here are my terms. No money requests, no guilt trips, no surprise visits, no comments about what I owe for past help. I don't need apologies. I need distance. The second went to my dad. You once told me you invest where you see returns. Consider my adulthood your return. I'm closing this account. A day after the tracking said they'd been delivered, a text from my dad popped up. Meet me Thursday, 10 a.m. The cafe near the bus station. No, please, no explanation. I stared at it for a long moment, breathed once, and typed back one word. Okay. The cafe by the bus station smelled like burnt espresso and fryer oil, exactly the way places near transit hubs always do. It was the same stop I'd used for years as a teenager, sitting near the front and watching Marvin check his mirrors. Now the linoleum was more worn, the chairs more scratched. My dad was already at a corner table when I walked in, wearing a pressed shirt that didn't quite hide how much weight he'd lost. For a second, neither of us knew how to begin. You look different, he said finally. Better or worse, I asked. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Just different. When the small talk ran out, he launched into a speech about how my mom's words at that special dinner had been misunderstood, how they'd done the best they could with limited resources, how parents sometimes make mistakes. I let him finish. The spoon in my coffee clinked softly as I stirred. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said quietly. It was an equation. You poured $80,000 into Tyler's image and borrowed against your shop to do it. You told me there was no return on investing $2,000 in me. I heard you. He winced, looking down. We believed he had a shot, he said. He still might. The loans. The cards. It just got away from us. Your mother thought maybe with what you've built you could help us catch up. Then we'd all be good again. Clean slate. I watched the steam from my cup fade. You don't owe me anything, I said. That's the point. And I don't owe you another chance to gamble my work on Tyler's life. You made your investments. This is the outcome. My accounts are closed. He opened his mouth, maybe to offer some bargain, maybe to bring up the baby, but I stood up before he could. I hope you figure things out, I said. I really do. Just not with my money and not in my life. I left him sitting there in that cracked vinyl booth under buzzing fluorescent lights, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Outside, buses hissed as they pulled away from the curb, the same sound that had marked my mornings as a kid. I walked past them toward my car, feeling the weird, bittersweet weight of finally stepping off a route I'd ridden for years. A week later came the gala I told you about at the beginning, the Future Scholars fundraiser downtown. Cindertrack had sponsored a table, and our logo glowed on a screen behind the stage. Julian straightened my simple black dress and squeezed my hand as we walked through the hotel doors. I hadn't expected to see my family there. I didn't think they moved in those circles. But as we took our seats, I caught sight of them at a table near the front. My mom in a sequined dress, my dad in a suit that didn't quite fit Tyler and Olivia, her pregnancy just beginning to show. When our eyes met, my mom gave me a bright, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We came to congratulate you," she said during a break between speeches, touching my arm like we were close. "Success means giving back, doesn't it? Your brother's baby? Your father's roof? The shop?" She trailed off, waiting for me to fill in the offer. She couldn't quite bring herself to speak. Instead, I excused myself and found Daniel, the event organizer. "If it's still possible," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, "I'd like to say something before the auction." He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Of course," he said. "People would love to hear from you." That's how I ended up on stage with the envelope, staring out at a room that suddenly felt very small. "Good evening," I began. "My name is Jenna Mitchell, co-founder of CinderTrack Analytics." My voice sounded clearer in the microphone than it felt in my chest. "I grew up in this city. When I was younger, I was told resources had to be invested where they brought returns. Tonight, I want to invest in a different equation." I opened the envelope and held up the document inside. CinderTrack is donating $80,000 to fund scholarships for young women in tech programs, girls who have been told they're a bad bet, or that there's no point in spending money on them. I want them to know they are worth more than someone else's cost-benefit analysis. The room rose to its feet in a wave of applause that washed over me like warm water. Near the front, I watched my mother's smile freeze and then crumble as the number sank in and the direction of it became obvious. My dad's shoulders sagged. Tyler looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. For a moment, our eyes met, and there it was. The stunned realization that the money they thought might rescue their debts had just been redirected to people they would never meet. I handed the microphone back to Daniel, walked off the stage, and stepped out into the warm desert night while the event rolled on behind me. In the quiet hallway, I pulled out my phone and blocked every remaining number with my last name. No speech, no explanation, just a final click shutting a door that should have been closed long ago. In the months that followed, life didn't turn into a montage of champagne and awards. It was quieter than that, and better. I started receiving emails from the scholarship committee with profiles of the first recipients, girls from South Phoenix, from Glendale, from reservation schools, miles outside the city. One had built a weather app for her family's farm. Another wanted to design accessible software for her brother with cerebral palsy. Reading their stories made my chest ache in a good way. I never met them in person. I didn't need to. It was enough to know that somewhere, a girl standing at a crossroads would hear yes, instead of "you made your choices." Word drifted back to me mostly through people who didn't realize we were related. My parents sold the house to cover part of the loans and unpaid cards. My dad ended up working in someone else's repair shop instead of his own. Tyler came back from Los Angeles when the money ran out and the calls stopped getting returned, picking up short-term production gigs and complaining loudly about how the industry was rigged. Olivia had the baby, and then a year later left. Nothing catastrophic, nothing dramatic, just the long, inevitable slide that happens when you build your life on borrowed money and borrowed faith in one golden child. None of it made me happy. It just made sense. One afternoon, on a whim, I walked down to the bus station instead of driving home from the office. The air smelled the same as it always had: diesel-hot pavement, a hint of stale coffee. An older driver stood by one of the buses, checking his watch. For a second, I thought I recognized his posture. "Marvin," I called, half unsure. He turned, squinted, then laughed. "Jenna, little Jenna from Roosevelt," he said. "You look successful." I laughed because there was no other word. We talked for a few minutes about routes and detours and how the city had changed. As I turned to go, I said, "You were the first adult who ever made me feel like I had a seat I deserved." "Thank you." He shrugged like it was nothing. "Everyone deserves a seat," he said. "Some folks just forget to make room." Now, when I stand on my balcony at night watching headlights flow along the freeway like quiet rivers of light, I think about how close I came to spending my whole life funding other people's dreams while they laughed at my milestones. I think about the girl counting change for bus fare and the woman on stage redirecting $80,000 with a steady voice. My name is Jenna Mitchell, and I am no one's backup plan anymore. If your family treats your boundaries like an attack and your sacrifices like a given, hear me clearly, you are allowed to walk away, even if they call it betrayal, even if they post about you online, even if they swear you'll regret it. You don't owe anyone your future just because you share their last name. Thank you for listening to my story. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place and where you're watching from, because I know I'm not the only one who chose peace over blood.